Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most complex, tragic, and honestly, historically significant periods in modern European history, the Yugoslav Wars, which tore through the region from 1991 to 2001. Now, to really grasp how a single nation unravels into Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II, try imagining Yugoslavia as this tightly glued, unified structure of macaroni. That glue? It represents a single multi-ethnic communist state holding together 6 totally distinct republics: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia, plus 2 autonomous provinces, Kosovo and Vojvodina. It was a really delicate, intricate balancing act. But you have to ask yourself, what happens when the glue holding all of that together simply vanishes?
So, here is our roadmap for untangling this chaotic decade. First, the collapse of Yugoslavia. Then, Slovenia and Croatia secede. Next, the tragedy of Bosnia, followed by the Kosovo conflict. Finally, we'll look at the shattered new map and the pursuit of justice in the aftermath.
All right, part 1, the collapse of Yugoslavia, the catalyst.
So, zooming back to the aftermath of World War II, Yugoslavia was basically held together by the iron grip of its dictator, Josip Broz Tito. He was literally the political glue keeping these incredibly diverse ethnic groups, mainly Orthodox Serbs, Catholic Croats, and Muslim Bosniaks, all unified under one roof. In fact, when he died in 1980, his funeral was one of the largest state gatherings in history. But without his strict, top-down control, the cracks showed up almost instantly. Throughout the 1980s, the country was absolutely crippled by massive foreign debt, soaring inflation, and high unemployment, which, as you might guess, fueled intense regional resentment. Then, by the late 80s, we see this huge rise in opportunistic nationalism. Leaders, like Slobodan Milosevic in Serbia and Franjo Tudjman in Croatia, started actively exploiting these old, historic ethnic grievances just for their own political gain. The stage was totally set for a massive fracture.
Moving into part 2, Slovenia and Croatia secede. The first dominoes start to fall.
Okay, so by 1991, that surging nationalism literally fractured the country. But how these secessions actually played out, it all came down to demographics. Take Slovenia, for example. When they declared independence in June 1991, things moved fast. Because Slovenia was ethnically homogeneous, with very few ethnic Serbs living there, the Serb-dominated Yugoslav army backed off after just a quick 10-day skirmish. They basically got out with minimal damage. But meanwhile, in Croatia, totally different story. Croatia had a really substantial ethnic Serb minority. Backed by the Yugoslav army, those Croatian Serbs rebelled and carved out their own unrecognized state right inside Croatia, calling it the Republic of Serbian Krajina. And that ignited a brutal 4-year war filled with horrific sieges. It didn't end until 1995, when Croatia reclaimed its territory through a massive military offensive known as Operation Storm. And just to give you a sense of the scale, that one offensive alone displaced up to 200,000 ethnic Serbs.
Which brings us to part 3, the tragedy of Bosnia, the absolute center of the collapse. To really grasp why Bosnia exploded the way it did, you have to look at who lived there. It was easily the most ethnically mixed republic in all of Yugoslavia. Roughly 44% Muslim Bosniak, 32% Orthodox Serb, and 17% Catholic Croat. When Bosnia held a vote for independence in 1992, this super delicate demographic balance just became a highly combustible mix. The Bosnian Serbs, backed by Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, outright rejected the independence vote. Instead, they declared their own state, Republika Srpska, and immediately launched a ruthless military campaign aimed at carving out ethnically pure territories.
It's honestly hard to wrap your head around, but seeing historical photos of UN peacekeepers standing right in the middle of a burned-out, shattered Sarajevo, it perfectly captures the absolute desperation of this conflict. Innocent civilians just found themselves completely trapped in this terrifying crossfire of ethnic cleansing and territorial ambition.
1,425. That's the number of days Bosnian Serb forces besieged the capital city of Sarajevo. Just to put that into perspective, that makes it the longest siege of a capital city in modern military history. For nearly 4 entire years, the residents of Sarajevo were trapped, getting showered with constant, totally indiscriminate sniper and artillery fire.
And then there's this number, 8,000. In July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces completely overran a UN-declared safe area in the town of Srebrenica. There, they systematically murdered more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys. It's a staggering atrocity, and it stands today as the worst act of genocide on European soil since World War II.
Eventually, the international community had to step in.
After NATO launched airstrikes on Bosnian Serb positions, all the warring parties were finally forced to the negotiating table. The result of that was the 1995 Dayton Accords, mediated by the U.S. Now, it did end the violence, which was crucial, but it left Bosnia with an incredibly complex and fragile political structure. It essentially split the country into two highly autonomous entities, all governed under one very delicate federal government.
All right, Part 4, the Kosovo conflict, the final insurgency. So the Dayton Accords stopped the bleeding in Bosnia, but that domino effect we talked about? Yeah, it wasn't quite finished. Fast forward to the late 90s, and all eyes shifted to Serbia's southern province of Kosovo. Kosovo was populated by an ethnic Albanian majority, and tensions there had been simmering for years. When a guerrilla group called the Kosovo Liberation Army, or KLA, started attacking Serbian authorities, Slobodan Milosevic responded with a brutal counterinsurgency campaign. We're talking widespread displacement of Albanian civilians and shocking reports of ethnic cleansing all over again. To force an end to it, NATO intervened in 1999 with a 78-day bombing campaign against Yugoslavia. What makes this super historically notable, and definitely controversial, is that NATO did this without the authorization of the UN Security Council. But ultimately, Serbian forces did withdraw. Which leads us to Part 5, a shattered new map, 7 independent states. By the dawn of the new millennium, the guns had finally gone silent, but the political landscape, completely unrecognizable. 10 years of continuous war had fundamentally shattered the old Yugoslavia. What was once a single country was now broken into 7 distinct independent states: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and finally Kosovo. And it is worth pointing out that Kosovo officially declared its independence in 2008, a status that Serbia still firmly rejects to this day.
And finally, Part 6, Justice and Human Legacy, the Aftermath.
So, in the wake of all this unimaginable violence, the global community faced a massive, incredibly difficult question. How on earth do you hold people accountable for systemic ethnic cleansing and genocide? The UN's answer was establishing the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the ICTY, in The Hague. This was a monumental shift in international law. We're talking the first use of war crimes tribunals in Europe since Nuremberg after World War II. Over its lifespan, the tribunal indicted 161 individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. They actually secured life sentences for high-profile figures like Bosnian Serb military leader Ratko Mladic and political leader Radovan Karadzic. And former Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic was put on trial too, though he actually died in his prison cell in 2006 before a verdict could even be reached.
But look, while tribunals can offer some sense of legal justice, they obviously can't undo the staggering human cost. More than 130,000 people lost their lives over this brutal decade.
And it doesn't stop there. 4 million people. That is how many refugees were displaced from their homes, fleeing violence and the absolute destruction of the communities they grew up in.
Which brings us to a really lingering final thought. We've just seen how the death of one strong man and the weaponization of history caused an entire nation to literally tear itself apart. But here's the thing. Decades later, this isn't just history for the Western Balkans. Deep ethnic divisions, political fragmentation, and those exact same historical grievances, they are still simmering just beneath the surface today. So we have to ask, while the borders have been redrawn and the tribunals have closed their doors, have the wounds of the Western Balkans truly healed? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I encourage you to keep questioning the world around you.